I'm going to invite you tonight to open, as a beginning place at least, to 1 Samuel chapter 11. 1 Samuel chapter 11. Throughout the reigns of Saul and David and Solomon, the children of Israel were one nation under one ruler. I mean, yes, you go back and you read situations like the rebellion of Absalom in the days of David, but we still refer to this period in Israel's history as the United Kingdom. As far as the Lord was concerned, there was just one ruler. If you've been following along in our reading schedule during the course of this year, you know we have now come to that section of the Old Testament that we refer to as the divided kingdom. And I thought I'd take a little bit of time this evening to kind of lay some groundwork for what's going on in this portion of the Old Testament. And I'll just go ahead and tell you, this is going to be a little bit more like a class than it is going to be like a sermon. I don't know how to make it otherwise. But what I hope to do this evening is to help make some sense of what's going on in the things that we have been reading a little bit and that we continue to read. When Solomon died somewhere around 930 BC, the kingdom, I don't know if you're going to be able to see that very well. The colors never come out exactly right. There's beautiful colors distinguishing between the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom there, but they don't really show. But when Solomon died around 930 BC, the kingdom appeared to be in good shape outwardly. But if there's one principle that we see over and over again in the pages of the Bible, it's that outward appearances can be deceiving. And the truth is, there had been some underlying problems for quite some time. It's been suggested that those problems went all the way back to the period of the Judges, and really even before that, to the conquest of the land and the allotment of the territory of each one of the tribes, where they were in relation to each other. But they certainly went back to the reigns of the kings of Israel under the United Kingdom, the issues that we see. I don't want to read too much into the text, but it's interesting to me that there were distinctions made between the people of Israel and the people of Judah, even going back to like the days of King Saul, the first king of Israel. And so when describing Saul's army, for example, here in 1 Samuel chapter 11, there are times when a distinction is made between Saul's soldiers who were from the tribe of Judah and those who were from the rest of the nation. And so when Saul gathered the men who were capable of fighting at a place called Bezek in 1 Samuel 11 verse 8, we're told that the people of Israel were 300,000 and the men of Judah 30,000. Why the distinction there? And that basic pattern really is followed over and over again when describing what was going on even during the United Kingdom. So going through the book of 1 Samuel a little bit, 1 Samuel chapter 15 and verse 4, Saul summoned the people and he numbered them at Telaim, 200,000 men on foot and 10,000 men of Judah. And so he again distinguishes. Or 1 Samuel chapter 17 and verse 52, the men of Israel and Judah rose with a shout and pursued the Philistines as far as Gath and the gates of Ekron, and so that the wounded Philistines fell on the way from Sha'aram as far as Gath and Ekron. We could look at other passages that say basically the same thing. There's a distinction continually made between them. Now, if you recall, the Lord had Samuel anoint David as king of Israel at a point when Saul was still alive, when he was still reigning, even though David, wouldn't take the throne until after Saul's death. And what I find interesting is that even after David was, after Saul died, David wasn't immediately anointed king over all of Israel. I don't know if you remember that from your reading of the Old Testament, but he was first anointed as king over Judah, over that southern section. And only later would it be that the people of Israel in the north would anoint him as king over the entire nation. And so, for example, 2 Samuel chapter 2, the first verse, after this David inquired of the Lord, shall I go up into any of the cities of Judah? And the Lord said to him, go up. And David said, to which shall I go up? And he said, to Hebron. And so David went up there, and his two wives also, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. And David brought up his men who were with him, every one with his household, and they lived in the towns of Hebron. And the men of Judah came, and there they anointed David king over the house of Judah. And it was about 7 years later before the entire nation would come and they would anoint David to be king over everybody. And so we read in 2 Samuel chapter 5, when you begin to look at all of that, about verse 4, it says, David was 30 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 40 years. At Hebron, he reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 months. And at Jerusalem, he reigned over all Israel and Judah 33 years. And so, there's a little bit of a distinction being made. And the reason I'm pointing all of this out is to just kind of highlight the fact that there were some distinctions made between Judah and the rest of the nation, even, again, going as far back as the United Kingdom. And during the reign of David, the borders of Israel were expanded really to almost their ideal limits. What God had promised to Abraham would be the limits of that. He fulfilled through King David. David would capture Jerusalem, which was at one point under the control of the Jebusites. We read about that in 2 Samuel 5. He would defeat the Philistines in 2 Samuel chapter 8, and the Moabites also, and the Edomites, and the Ammonites, and the Syrians, or the Arameans, as some translations call them. And David would even control the city of Damascus, far to the north, with, if not, directly through having troops there and taxing the people there. And so when you begin to look at the reign of David during that period of time, that actually is the United Kingdom map, that's the territory that it basically covers through, if you could see the different colors, it would show Saul's kingdom is a little bit different from David's kingdom, which is a little bit different from Solomon's kingdom. But it's beginning to approach what God had promised to the Israelites that they would have, the land, the promised land, as we call it. And when you look at the story of beginning with the divided kingdom, I just mentioned all of the people that David had conquered, Jebusites and Philistines and Moabites and Edomites and Ammonites and Syrians or Arameans. If you just keep those names in your mind as you keep reading the story of the Israelites, what you're going to find is that some of these people that David had conquered, they are going to be more than happy to take advantage of either Judah or Israel when they become independent kingdoms. For example, if you ever go through the book of Obadiah, all one chapter of it, the book describes the destruction that would come upon the Edomites because they were guilty of kicking the people of Jerusalem when they were down, so to speak. And so it'll deal with that sort of stuff as we go on in our reading of the Old Testament. But getting back to what we're talking about tonight, the kingdom that Solomon inherited from David, it was one of the great kingdoms of the world at that time. We're told in 1 Kings chapter 4 and verse 21 that Solomon ruled over all the kingdoms from the Euphrates to the land of the Philistines and to the border of Egypt, and they brought tribute and served Solomon all the days of his life. Again, approximating what God had said would be the territory that the Israelites would have. And of course, the lifestyle of Solomon was in keeping with the position of the nation that he ruled over at that time. When you go to the book of Ecclesiastes in chapter 2, Solomon would say of himself, I made great works. I built houses and I planted vineyards for myself. I made myself gardens and parks and planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. I made myself pools from which to water the forest of growing trees. I bought both male and female servants and had servants who were born in my house. I also had great possessions of herds and flocks, more than any who had been before me in Jerusalem. I also gathered for myself silver and gold and the treasure of kings and provinces. And so he goes through all of these things that he had and that he had done. And I'll just tell you, all of that was not without some cost to the people of Israel. I mean, they paid taxes. Some of them were even subjected to forced labor, we read about in 1 Kings chapter 5. But one thing that's interesting, when you go back and you read about Solomon's system of taxation, you see it in 1 Kings chapter 4, we won't take the time to read it tonight, is that there's nothing said about the tribe of Judah in that. And some have concluded from that Judah was given preferential treatment in all of this, that they were exempted from the taxes that everybody else in the nation had to pay. I don't know if that can be proven necessarily, but I think that's an interesting thought, one that we'll come back to in just a moment. Everything we've talked about up to this point kind of serves to provide us with some background information concerning the condition of the nation. And it seems to me that there were some problems that were kind of lurking under the surface all along that contributed to the division of the kingdom following Solomon's death. All of the things we've talked about this evening contributed to that problem. And some of the things just mentioned about Solomon's reign were some of the specific causes of the division that took place, at least as far as the people of Israel were concerned. Here were their reasons for why they wanted to separate. But I do want you to notice that all of this really, that all of that really just kind of provides the setting. None of it is actually the real reason that the nation divided. The real reason the nation divided was because of God's judgment on Solomon's unfaithfulness. And I want you to take just a moment. Let's go over to 1 Kings chapter 11 for just a moment. 1 Kings chapter 11, and I want to begin reading in verse 4. It says at beginning in 1 Kings 11 and verse 4, "For when Solomon was old, his wives turned away his heart after other gods, and his heart was not wholly true to the Lord his God, as was the heart of David his father. For Solomon went after Ashtaroth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and after Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. And so Solomon did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and did not wholly follow the Lord, as David his father had done. And then Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, and for Molech, the abomination of the Ammonites, on the mountain east of Jerusalem. And so he did for all his foreign wives, who made offerings and sacrificed to their gods." That's where Solomon was at this point in time. He's in his old age at this point. And that's going to be the real reason the kingdom divides. If it had been God's will for the nation not to divide, it wouldn't have divided. God would have kept it together. He held it together during the reigns of Saul and David and Solomon, despite the fact that there were already underlying problems. And I have no doubt that the Lord could have held it together longer had it been his will to do so. In essence, the nation paid the price for one man's lack of self-control. And so let's take a look now at the immediate events that led to the dividing of the kingdom. Go down a little bit, 1 Kings chapter 11. Let's go down further in there, down to about verse 41, and we'll pick up reading again there. 1 Kings 11 and verse 41. It says, "Now the rest of the acts of Solomon and all that he did and his wisdom, are they not written in the books of the acts of Solomon? And the time that Solomon reigned in Jerusalem over all Israel was 40 years. And Solomon slept with his fathers and was buried in the city of David his father, and Rehoboam his son reigned in his place." Keep reading. Chapter 12, verse 1. "Rehoboam went to Shechem, for all Israel had come to Shechem to make him king. And as soon as Jeroboam the son of Nebat heard of it, for he was still in Egypt, where he had fled from King Solomon, then Jeroboam returned from Egypt, and they sent and called him, and Jeroboam and all the assembly of Israel came and said to Rehoboam, 'Your father made our yoke heavy. Now therefore lighten the hard service of your father and this heavy yoke on us, and we will serve you.' And he said to them, 'Go away for 3 days, then come again to me.' And so the people went away. And then King Rehoboam took counsel with the old men who had stood before Solomon his father while he was yet alive, saying, 'How do you advise me to answer this people?' And they said to him, 'If you will be a servant to this people today and serve them and speak good words to them when you answer them, then they will be your servants forever.' But he abandoned the counsel that the old men gave him and took counsel with the young men who had grown up with him and stood before him. And he said to them, 'What do you advise that we answer this people who have said to me, lighten the yoke that your father put on us?' And the young men who had grown up with him said to him, 'Thus you shall speak to the people who said to you, your father made our yoke heavy, but you lighten it for us. Thus shall you say to them, my little finger is thicker than my father's thighs. Now, whereas my father laid on you a heavy yoke, I will add to your yoke. My father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with scorpions.' And so Jeroboam and all the people came to Rehoboam the third day, as the king had said, 'Come to me again the third day.' And the king answered the people harshly, and forsaking the counsel that the old men had given him, he spoke to them according to the counsel of the young men, saying, 'My father made your yoke heavy, but I will add to your yoke. My father disciplines you with whips, but I will discipline you with scorpions.' And so the king did not listen to the people, for it was a turn of affairs brought about by the Lord, that he might fulfill his word, which the Lord had spoken by Ahijah the Shilonite to Jeroboam the son of Nebat." And so the kingdom divides. You know, there are times when we are practically forced to ask the question, what were you thinking? You ever ask that question of somebody? What were you thinking? And I think this is one of those times. I realize that it was God's will that the nation be divided at this point, but that doesn't take away from the fact that Rehoboam acted foolishly here. And that's one of the interesting things about the events of the Bible. Something can be God's will that he is going to accomplish, and yet the people who are involved in it are still responsible for the decisions they make and the actions they engage in. And you see that when you come into the New Testament and the cross of Christ. It was God's will for Jesus to die on the cross, and yet the people who put him there, they're still responsible for their actions. You see that kind of thing really all through the Bible. And so as we look at what happened on this occasion, I want us to look at it without taking into consideration what God said to Solomon and Jeroboam. That this is he's going to take the kingdom from Solomon, and he's going to raise up Jeroboam and give him 10 of the tribes and all of that. And the reason I want to look at it this way is because Rehoboam didn't do what he did because God planned to divide the kingdom. He didn't say, well, this is God's plan, so I'm going to act foolishly here. He did what he did of his own free will. And so I want to look at it from that standpoint. I'm not even sure if his father told him what the Lord intended to do. We don't have any record of that, and he doesn't act like he knows anything about it. And so he may have been acting under the presumption that I'm going to rule over all Israel. And when I look at what is said, it seems to me that the people of Israel did as well. They came, it says, 1 Kings chapter 12 and verse 1, that Rehoboam went to Shechem, for all Israel had come to Shechem to make him king. That was the reason they came. They didn't come to get this division started. They came to anoint Rehoboam as king. And so the people of Israel didn't go with the intention of breaking away from the tribe of Judah. They were going to make him king. And I believe they would have accepted him as their king if he had simply been willing to lighten the burden that Solomon had placed upon them in the form of taxation, in the form of the forced labor that they had to endure. One thing I believe you can say about Rehoboam, though, is that he wasn't necessarily impulsive. He didn't just off the cuff answer these people. He didn't make a hasty decision. He gave himself 3 days to think about it, to seek the advice of others. And the other thing, though, that you can say about him is that he just wasn't super good at distinguishing good advice from bad advice. I mean, I don't know how to say that. The kingdom had remained firmly under Solomon's control throughout his reign, and his advisors evidently recognized that those demands that he had made of the people, that they had worn on the people. But even if we didn't know all the details, if someone had told you that Rehoboam here's what he does. He's going to reject the advice of the elders, that is his father's advisors, and he's going to listen to the young men who grew up with him and served him. No other details given. What would you have thought? Would you have thought, well, those young guys are probably right, I mean, there may be times when you have to go against the advice of the experienced advisors. But let me go and give you a general rule here. Generally speaking, that ought to probably be a red flag. It should have been a red flag for Rehoboam. And the truth is, I wonder if Rehoboam knew, at least in the back of his mind, that he was doing the wrong thing. I think what we have going on here in this story is something that's going on time and again that still goes on today. I think we're seeing a little bit of peer pressure taking place. And I wouldn't be surprised if Rehoboam felt like he couldn't really back down. I mean, he had to be the tough guy. He had to exert his authority. He was going to be the king. And I doubt I have to tell you this, but I'm going to say it anyway. That almost never leads to wise decisions. I mean, almost never. And so Rehoboam soon found out that the people of Israel, they're not making empty threats when they implied that they were going to refuse to serve him if he didn't give them a break. He responded to them as his young companions had counseled, and the people of Israel wanted nothing to do with that. So 1 Kings 12, verse 16. When all Israel saw that the king did not listen to them, the people answered the king, "What portion do we have in David? We have no inheritance in the son of Jesse. To your tents, O Israel. Look now to your own house, David." And so Israel went to their tents. Here's the division. And if there was any doubt about how much they despised their previous, arrangement, this ought to have removed that. And Rehoboam evidently sent one of his men to talk with the people of Israel. But again, he's not someone who's known for his wise choices. I want you to I'm going to read it as it is, and I want you to spot the problem with who he sends, okay? We're told in 1 Kings chapter 12, verse 18, that King Rehoboam sent Adoram, who was taskmaster over the forced labor, and all Israel stoned him to death with stones. I'm just going to say, if you're trying to smooth things over, and one of the problems that the people have is they didn't like the forced labor they were engaged in, that's probably not the guy to send, you know? I don't know why he would have thought that was a good idea to begin with. And so it became obvious to Rehoboam that words would no longer work. I mean, he sends this guy, he's going to try to smooth things over, and they stone him to death. And Rehoboam understands this is serious. And so he fled to Jerusalem, and he immediately began making preparations to take by force what had been denied to him by the people of the northern tribes. And the only thing that kept Rehoboam from doing this, at least to begin with, was that the people were warned not to go up and fight against their relatives. A prophet by the name of Shemaiah in 1 Kings 12 and verse 24 says, don't do this. Later on, though, what the record tells us in 1 Kings chapter 14 and verse 30 is that there was war between Rehoboam and Jeroboam, king of the south and the king of the north, continually. And so the effect of that warning was very short-lived. When I read what is said about Rehoboam, it seems to me that there may have been a period of time when he tried to do the right thing, at least to one degree. At one point in time, 2 Chronicles chapter 11, the priests and the Levites from all Israel, from the northern kingdom, they all come to Rehoboam. In fact, the record says in 2 Chronicles 11 and verse 17 that they strengthened the kingdom of Judah. And for 3 years they made Rehoboam the son of Solomon secure, for they walked for 3 years in the way of David and Solomon. And so he tries to bring people in. He's got the Levites and he's got the priests, and he's trying to do the right thing. But unfortunately, this good influence didn't last. And things eventually got so bad that in 1 Kings chapter 14 and verse 22, it says that Judah did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and they provoked him to jealousy with their sins that they committed, more than all that their fathers had done. What a statement that is. You guys are doing evil, and you're doing more than everybody who's gone before you has done. And so the reign of Rehoboam can be summed up with these words that were written about him in 2 Chronicles chapter 12 and verse 14. This is not what you want as your final word. He did evil, for he did not set his heart to seek the Lord. What sad words. And it almost sounds like he didn't set out to do evil. He just didn't set his heart to seek the Lord. I'll tell you, that's all it takes. If we don't set our hearts to seek the Lord, let me tell you what we're going to end up doing. We're going to end up doing evil. Now, as I've already said, as we've already seen, Jeroboam was going to be the first king of the northern kingdom. And here's the sad thing about that. He's not really any better. In fact, his sin was the sin by which the kings who followed him would be measured. I mean, how would you like that as your legacy, so to speak? He set the standard. Not the kind of legacy anybody ought to strive for, but it was his legacy. And so over and over again, as we go through the through the Old Testament record, we read basically the same thing about the kings who would follow Jeroboam. One of those is in 1 Kings chapter 15 and verse 34. It says of one of the kings, he did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and he walked in the way of Jeroboam and in his sin, which he made Israel to sin. Those words were written about Baasha, but they could have been written about almost any of the kings of Israel. In fact, same thing, different wording maybe sometimes is said about all of them. And so the sin of Jeroboam that's under consideration has to do with the golden calves that he was set up. One in Bethel, one in Dan. Evidently not long after he became king of Israel, he would do this. And take just a minute, go to 1 Kings chapter 12 for just a moment, if you're not still there. 1 Kings chapter 12, and I want to start reading in verse 25. 1 Kings 12, verse 25. It says, Then Jeroboam built Shechem in the hill country of Ephraim, and he lived there. And he went out from there and built Penuel. And Jeroboam said in his heart, Now the kingdom will turn back to the house of David, if this people go up to offer sacrifices in the temple of the Lord at Jerusalem. Then the heart of this people will turn again to their Lord, to Rehoboam, king of Judah, and they'll kill me, and they'll return to Rehoboam, king of Judah. And so the king took counsel Excuse me, and he made 2 calves of gold. And he said to the people, "You have gone up to Jerusalem long enough. Behold your gods, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt." And he set one in Bethel and the other in Dan. And then this thing became a sin, for the people went as far as Dan to be before one. And he also made temples on high places and appointed priests from among the people who were not of the Levites. And Jeroboam appointed a feast on the 15th day of the 8th month, like the feast that was in Judah, and he offered sacrifices on the altar. Now I'm just going to go and tell you, if I had been Jeroboam, I'm not sure I'd have picked golden calves. I mean, that doesn't sound like the thing you ought to do. That had already been done once in Israel's history. You go back to Exodus chapter 32, and that didn't turn out well. I mean, God almost wiped out the entire nation at that point. And if it hadn't been for Moses, God would have completely destroyed all of the Israelites that day. And yet, Jeroboam uses almost the same exact words. "Behold your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." There's one thing I find interesting about that. Well, I think we touched on it. We didn't really make any point of it. But earlier we touched on the fact that Jeroboam, when Rehoboam was going to be appointed as king, he had just come back from where? Did you catch that? He'd just come back from Egypt. He had fled there from King Solomon. And when Solomon died and they're going to anoint Rehoboam as king, he comes back from Egypt. I was going to tell you, I wouldn't be surprised if he picked that up there. I mean, that's where the Israelites picked that up, it seems to me. They didn't get to Mount Sinai and say, what do we want to build? What are we going to do with all this gold? I think they were influenced by Egypt. I think he was too. And it's hard to imagine just how much evil came from this one decision that was designed really to do nothing more than keep the people from going to worship at the temple in Jerusalem. That was Jeroboam's motivation. If they go back to Jerusalem again and again and again, they're going to get to thinking, you know what, we really shouldn't be divided. We really ought to be one nation. The Lord is our God. The Lord is their God, and we need to be together. And even when warned by prophets, we're told in 1 Kings chapter 13 and verse 33, Jeroboam did not turn from his evil way. He was determined, to the point that not even the death of his own son, that not even the threat of captivity was enough to cause him to repent. I'm going to read a little bit more. 1 Kings 14. 1 Kings 14, verse 7. We're almost done. In 1 Kings 14, verse 7, "Go tell Jeroboam, thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, because I exalted you from among the people and made you leader over my people Israel and tore the kingdom away from the house of David and gave it to you. And yet you have not been like my servant David, who kept my commandments and followed me with all his heart, doing only that which was right in my eyes. But you have done evil above all who were before you. And have gone and made for yourself other gods and metal images, provoking me to anger, and have cast me behind your back. Therefore, behold, I will bring harm upon the house of Jeroboam, and will cut off from Jeroboam every male, both bond and free, in Israel, and will burn up the house of Jeroboam as a man burns up refuse until it's all gone. Anyone belonging to Jeroboam who dies in the city, the dogs shall eat, and anyone who dies in the open country, the birds of the heavens shall eat, for the Lord has spoken it. Arise, therefore, go to your house. And when your feet enter the city, the child shall die, his son. And all Israel shall mourn for him and bury him, for he only of Jeroboam shall come to the grave. Because in him there is found something pleasing to the Lord, the God of Israel, in the house of Jeroboam. Moreover, the Lord will raise up for him a king over Israel who shall cut off the house of Jeroboam today. And henceforth the Lord will strike Israel as a reed is shaken in the water, and root up Israel out of this good land that he gave to their fathers, and scatter them before the Euphrates, because they have made their Asherim, provoking the Lord to anger. And he will give Israel up because of the sins of Jeroboam, which he sinned and made Israel to sin. One thing you say about the Bible is it doesn't really sugarcoat. I was going to say it doesn't sugarcoat much. It doesn't sugarcoat anything. What a tragic story this is. And it would have been terribly tragic if not for one thing. And that is the faithfulness of God. Despite the rebellion of his people, God still kept the promises that he had made to Abraham. Way back in Genesis chapter 22 and verse 18, in your offspring shall all the nations of the earth be blessed. You know, Israel was brought into existence to help facilitate that, to bring it towards that end. And every step of the way, they are trying to ruin it. I mean, that's just how they did. And despite their rebellion, despite everything they do that leads in the wrong direction, God is able to accomplish his plan to bring his Son into the world so that all the nations of the world would be blessed in him, just as he had promised to Abraham. That's really the remarkable thing about reading the Old Testament story. I mean, yeah, there are a lot of great stories about, we learn this principle from this and we learn that principle from that. But the one thing that is beneficial about this plan where we have to read through the entirety of the Old Testament is we see that thread where God is accomplishing his purposes, where mankind is not in any way, shape, or form cooperating with that. Where people are doing their own thing and they have their own agenda and they, going about things their own way. And God still, out of his greatness and his goodness, seeks what's in our best interest and he brings it to pass. And that's the beautiful story of the Scriptures. There's a lot of ugly in it. There's no doubt about it. The story of the God who loved us and who accomplished his plan is what comes shining forth in the thing that we need to see. If you're here tonight and you owe some duty to God, whatever that might be, you never obeyed the gospel of Christ, why not tonight choose to be part of what has been in the planning, not really just down through the centuries, but from eternity past. That's where God came up with that. Before he even created the world, God had a plan by which he would save you, or by which you could be saved. And so if you've never obeyed the gospel of Christ, why not do that tonight? Or if there's some other way, you need to bring your life into conformity with his will. We see over and over again the peril that comes from not doing that. We need to learn the lesson. Let's serve the Lord. Let's be the people he has called us to be. And if we can help you tonight in some way, we ask that you come as we stand and as we sing.
I hear the Savior